feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled Sundance review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Matt, are you ready to take a dip?
Dip that tip right in the infinity pool, baby. Today, we are reviewing Brandon Cronenberg's Infinity Pool, which did premiere at the Sundance Film Festival, but will be released on January 27th in Canada and the US by Neon in the US, Elevation Pictures here in Canada. So it's one of those Sundance movies that we just saw slightly earlier than everyone else. But as we're dropping this, it's going to be out in a matter of probably tomorrow night if they do early screening. So you guys can check this out pretty much right away. So a little bit different than some of the other Sundance reviews we've been doing, Eric, like Eileen and Magazine Dreams and Fair Play, where those will be coming out further in the future, either because they just got acquired or they don't have distribution yet and things like that. But this is one that has a distributor, going to be released. Everyone can kind of check it out in the next couple days. But we're back with a little bit of CanCon as well, because we have we're gonna a lot of Cronenberg in late 2022 and into 2023, because Daddy Cronenberg had a movie last year. You have little baby future. You have baby boy Cronenberg have a movie now, and then your baby girl Cronenberg having a movie later this year, right? So
yeah, Caitlin Cronenberg's Humane.
Yeah. So how you doing? Did you dip that tip too?
I sure did, Matt. This morning, watching Infinity Pool, early morning screenings for Cronenberg movies, whether they be father, son, or daughter, it's always an interesting experience because you partly have to be in a mindset, I think.
I feel like you should watch any of those movies at 3:30 in the morning, and that's the only time you should watch them.
Perfect. They are, you're mentioning like there's sure, great movies on City TV, which is funny because David Cronenberg's Videodrome, in that movie, the James Woods character works at basically what is kind of a faux version of City TV. It's one of those things where it's
Did
like,
I plan this? Absolutely not.
No. A midnight movie is, David Cronenberg has become an auteur filmmaker over time. When his movies were first released, they were reviled by the Canadian rating system and much of the critical community. It wasn't until a little bit later on, I think with, The Dead Zone and The Fly, that were more kind of classier, but still had that style of the body horror genre, that he started to kind of gain a little bit of respect. And now you do have Brendan Cronenberg directing his third feature film after Antiviral and Possessor. And Possessor also played at Sundance a couple of years ago, and that was during the pandemic. And its release was a fascinating one because when it kind of played originally, it was called Possessor, and then the marketing as when it was being released theatrically or streaming, because theaters weren't open at that point, or very few were, it was retitled as Possessor Uncut. And then you right. See the cast in Brandon Cronenberg's movies. Caleb Landry Jones and Sarah Gadon were in his first film. Then you have people like recent Academy Award nominee Andrew Riceborough and Jennifer Jason Leigh, who was in Existence, David Cronenberg's movie, and Christopher Abbott, and these wonderful casts. And then this kind of continues that with Alexander Skarsgård and Mia Goth particularly. So that style of looking at body horror is very much there, but there's also this interesting kind of depiction of the wealthy, I think, in this movie, that there's something that I do want to talk about that works, that might be more subtle than meets the eye. But overall, I would definitely say if you liked Possessor, if you like Antiviral, if you like the body of work that Brandon Cronenberg has made so far, I think you will probably gravitate towards this. If you do not, you might be a little bit averse to partaking in his version of the hedonistic lifestyle that's portrayed on screen and the kind of phantasmagoric genre filmmaking.
I'll give a quick premise of the movie. We've been doing this for our Sundance reviews. I think if you're tuning into this and with this coming out so soon, you've seen trailers and different things, you probably kind of know what it's about. But here's the premise from Wikipedia. Guided by a seductive and mysterious woman, a couple on vacation venture outside the resort grounds and find themselves in a culture filled with violence, hedonism, and untold horror. A tragic accident soon leaves them facing a zero tolerance policy for crime. Either you'll be executed, or if you're rich enough to afford it, you can watch yourself die instead. Shot in Croatia. I think I've been to the town that this was shot in. I'm looking at right now. But Eric, when I'm telling you I saw a Canadian, Croatian, Hungarian production, threw me for a loop because my wife, born in Croatia, she's Croatian. Her parents moved from Canada, well, Croatia to Canada, and now Canada to Hungary. So right away, I'm thrown for a loop. I feel like
A
Cronenberg was
Fruit
etched
Loop?
into my brain at this point. But I would say I'll quickly go because I think you are the genre guy of the two of us. Like, I like horror movies. I'm pretty
Genre.
open to I'm pretty open to anything, right? Like, I wouldn't say I'm either here nor there on Baby Boy Cronenberg or Daddy Cronenberg or any Cronenberg. Like, I just I can't say I love them. I don't hate them. I'll go in and watch each one and just decide for each one. I kind of liked Possessor. I remember. I don't know if I loved it, but I did like it. Um, Going into this, I like trippy movies. I like, interesting visuals, and I'm open to anything. Nothing really grosses me out rarely or is too much for me. But watching this, and maybe it's the time I watched it, the headspace I was in or something like that. I did watch it in the morning as well. Probably the wrong time to watch a movie like this. I just could not. It was one of those, like, you're watching it and I just go, I get that this is for someone. And you put it perfectly of being like, I think going into this, you either know if you're going to vibe with it or not, right? Like, if you watch the trailers and you liked Antiviral and you liked Possessor, you probably know if you're going to like this movie. And if you don't and you watch it, you are probably not going to like it. I went in with an open mind, and in this one, I fell on the latter, where I just found it very vile. I found it pointless at times. I got what it was, you know, trying to say. And we've gotten a lot of movies about, the wealthy kind of using that wealth to, either be assholes in many different ways. This is a very in your face way to show it, in a very blunt and way of or portraying this in a kind of a sci-fi concept. And I was intrigued by that, but as it kind of went on, takes a little while to get there. Once it gets there, I found it got very repetitive, to the point where I don't know what more than that kind of very simple thesis. Uh, did it expand on any of that? I'm like, I don't know. And then just its imagery is very try hard, in the sense of, like, whether he's trying to impress his dad, or if he's just trying to kind of see how far he can go and push the boundaries. Like, that's ultimately what he's doing. I just don't know if it adds anything. Like, it just gets so explicit and so violent and so vile at times. I'm just like, I don't understand who enjoys this. And, like, I get it. I get that people do, but part of me just doesn't understand. And I go, I just don't understand what I'm supposed to take from this that's enjoyable. And I'm not saying every movie needs to be enjoyable, but then if it's not enjoyable to watch, it needs to be saying something. And then I get what it's saying, but then I'm like, is that very surface level? And then I kind of think it is. I think the performances are solid. I like Alexander Skarsgård in anything I see him pop up in. Like, I think he's a charismatic guy. Um, I love Mia Goth. Obviously, I tweeted this, that she's probably our best modern day scream queen. Like, she's absolutely crushes it in every horror genre movie she's in, and I think she's fantastic in this. But the movie overall, I feel like, if you're gonna like this or not, and if you go in kind of in the middle of being here nor there, maybe you'll fall on my side, maybe you won't. But I just found it kind of vile and one note and repetitive. So I did not vibe with it at all, but I will shut up and let you go.
Yeah, I don't know if I loved it per se, but I think the first half is stronger in setting a tone and a feeling with having this central character played by Alexander Skarsgård, who's this kind of fledgling author who wrote one book and is kind of has a little bit of writer's block, but also kind of feels like he's toiling away in obscurity and not being able to really, go in the direction that he wants to. He's married into a wealthy family, and so he's basically plateauing in this kind of luxurious kind of paradise gated resort. And when you're watching those scenes, I do feel there's something there where it's just kind of you're seeing this character in a form of luxurious limbo. And as the character's kind of toiling away, kind of almost apathetic or numb to the world around him, he's slowly kind of brought back to life with the Mia Goth character Gabby coming into play, and first saying like she's a big fan of his book, and kind of being the number one fanboy or person in this kind of relationship. And so that kind of lures him out of his comfort zone, because when we see M and James, played by Alexander Skarsgård and Cleopatra Coleman, they're kind of like, oh, should we go to that Chinese restaurant tonight that's in the village? I don't, and James is kind of like, I don't really want to do that. But then as soon as Gabby suggests that, he's like, well, because she's such a big fan, I want to be more indulged in that kind of praise. And you watch those scenes and you kind of feel like, okay, there's something interesting here, because the character of James doesn't necessarily feel like he belongs in the lifestyle or the world that he has married into. And then as soon as the sort of catalyst event happens, which weirdly reminded me, I don't know if you thought of this at all, but I know what you did last summer, where they hit the guy and they don't know what to do, and they drive back to the resort. But it kind of reminded me of that a little bit. It was like, swear, like, we'll never talk about this again. It's like, I know what you did last summer vacation. And so they go back to the resort, they get caught by the authorities. And I think that's kind of interesting as well, because you're looking at the idea of committing a crime in another country and having to abide by those rules. And usually there's no intervention by your own government, or very little, intervention. Like, you think of something like Midnight Express specifically, where, you're basically on your own. But the cost here, or the proposition that's presented by Thomas Kretschmann, who's probably best known for Avengers Age of Ultron. He's the guy that helped kind of create the twins, Aaron Taylor. He's the guy that wears the monocle. I can never remember his name.
Baron von something. Baron, keep going.
Yeah, but he plays this corrupt detective who just basically says like, okay, these are the two options you have. You can, face the consequences of your action, which is an execution, or you can
Von
still
Strucker.
you can still face those consequences. You can still be Von Struck in execution, but we can clone you, and the clone version of you will stand in for your crime, and the clone will have the awareness of what you've done,
crime you did,
and they'll still think you're you. And so he goes through this process, and it's kind of like this rebirth in a way of him maybe finding a new family or a new in crowd to be with. And maybe because all these other people that he's later introduced through Mia Goth's character, in order to kind of become sort of a part of the elite crowd, like, he finally feels welcome. But there's this kind of tug of war between the two that I think is really interesting. And that's kind of the first act of the film. And there's an ethical element as well. And watching, the part of the stipulation is that you have to watch the execution, which I actually do think is kind of interesting, where you see two reactions to how this kind of plays out. One is morbid curiosity and turning into kind of weird fascination, and almost like dwelling on it. It's like, did I like that? I think I might have opened something in myself that I didn't see. And then the other part, which is, M's perspective, where that was disgusting and horrible, and I disgusted that you didn't have the same reaction to me. And so that's almost looking at it from the point of view of entertainment, right? And I think that that's kind of interesting. But then when you get into the more hedonistic aspect of it, of the self-indulgent kind of like, let's continue to do this, and being brought into
we can get away with anything because we have enough money, essentially. Yeah,
and even the masks, like, reflecting like the ugliest part of you on the outside, and kind of almost looking a little bit like The Purge, like those things
Yep.
kind of
I thought of The
feel
Purge as well. Yeah.
like, again, like very
But let's
surface
throw it out
level.
there. Would that resort, even if that was a tradition of this, I think fictional country that they're in, they're not in. They're shot in Croatia and stuff like that. But like,
Yeah, it's a
I think
fictitious.
I forget the country's name that they made up. But like,
It's
um,
Latoken.
yeah, thank you. Those masks, they're not pulling those out at a resort and doing some sort of like those are like, come on. Like it's so disturbing looking that they're not like, hey guys, we have a special presentation at this resort tonight where we're going to show you the traditional whatever. And they're these fucking horrific looking masks. I'm like, not a chance. Not a chance. Anyways, that's just one little
They
thing.
do feel
But
over designed, and I think the one thing I did like a little bit more in Possessor in terms of the distorted Andrew Riceborough mask in
yeah.
Possessor, I think is more graphically interesting than the masks that they're wearing in this, because it kind of does feel almost like we're getting into The Purge or the Strangers territory with the design, where
Yeah.
maybe it's a little too much with like the coins in the mouth or the two faces or
And I get
the
it's a
horns and
sci-fi
things like that.
suspension of disbelief. It's a sci-fi story about a country who can clone you and shit like that. So like I get it. But
They're
I'm also
profiting
just
off of
like,
you, of creating a carbon copy of yourself, and like,
yeah.
again, like, I think that that's kind of interesting, but the world building only goes so far with that. And even the
Yeah.
idea of like the antiquated version of this cloning facility, like, it's like, I actually thought there was a couple of hard edits that were quite funny, where like it'll cut from like one extreme sequence to something that's like almost like spending a moment in a doctor's office waiting to go in, or going to this weird like basement dungeon to use an ATM, the one ATM that they have. Like,
Because
those
you have
things
to get the money to pay them. Yeah.
are kind of funny, and I think they're like, I think the one thing that the Cronenberg family as a whole doesn't get enough credit for is that they can be very funny. Obviously
Yeah.
very morbidly so, but like there are moments like that that I think work quite well. And again, like, I think that slow build and even some of the cinematography, like the way that the camera kind of moves, and it also still is claustrophobic, but it's shot in these kind of wide kind of angles or compositions where you see a lot of space, but you still kind of feel like you're trapped within the
Yeah.
environment. And I even like the idea that it kind of gets into with the character being trapped in paradise. And I always like movies where characters are trying to leave a town or a room
And
or
there's
a
something
house.
going on where they can't.
They
Yeah.
can't, and they're stuck there. And like, we've even seen that a little bit, with like melancholy at resorts. With, I'm not comparing in the same league, but like even with After Sun. And there was a Tim Roth movie that came out earlier this year from Michelle Franco called Sundown, where it's like you're kind of rotting in paradise in a lot of ways, and you're kind of like waiting until something awakes you or excites you. And ultimately he's saying, the rich are so bored, the rich are so uninterested in life, that they need to
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 go.
kill
Yeah.
or
And do
maim,
vile
or
things. And yeah.
in order to feel something. And it's, again, it's very much a surface level
I like that
metaphor.
concept. Yeah, that's what I mean. But I like the idea there. I just wish that it was explored a little bit more rather than just trying to. I think it's so focused on showing you some like explicit, imagery or how explicit, the crimes that they commit are and things like that, that I feel like it doesn't go deep enough into that kind of social commentary and that thing. Like, I know people have said this is like White Lotus for perverts, right? And it's just like, I get that, because it
But
is
isn't
that
White
kind of
Lotus
thing
kind
of
of
like,
perverted though as well?
it is definitely, but I think, or maybe White Lotus for fucking sociopaths. I don't know.
Or
I like
sickos, I
for
think
people,
that's,
for sickos, yeah, who
yeah.
are actually watching it, not necessarily the people in it. It's all depicting, the rich being horrible people. Um, but yeah, I get that, and I think you talking about it is more interesting than what I watched in the film. Right, I do agree with you that there were some jump cuts and some of the editing that I thought were genuinely funny or got me, in the sense of like there were a couple, like I don't really jump at jump scares much anymore. But there were a couple things in here with just the editing that I think was perfect at the right time, or someone opening their eyes or something that like that would kind of actually get me. So I'll give it credit where credit's due there. but then yeah, like I don't know. I know Mia Goth is. I said like she's doing her thing, and she's so good at it because she has the perfect look and delivery for these types of movies. But I really do think that um she carries this and is so great. And I understand, like, sure, she's sort of being typecast, but she's so good at this specific thing that I understand
Right.
why anyone making a movie like, would want her in it if you're making a horror movie or a genre movie or something like that. But she's
There's
great.
also one scene in this film that I wonder if it has something to do with like his own self critique or how he feels about how he's, because I mean there's been a lot of talk about the nepo baby thing and stuff like that, but
Sure.
like, but not the nepo baby in particular, but just like kind of creating your own style or figuring out who you want to be as a filmmaker or as a person, because there's a sequence where we see Skarsgård walking in front of a car and at gunpoint, and a review of his book being read and him crying. And I do wonder, like, I remember when Antiviral came out, and like part of that story is about like literally consuming your favorite celebrity's flesh and like growing it and becoming closer to the person that you love the most, in a way that's kind of, again, very sadistic and perverse. But there was something kind of funny about that scene, because you have Mia Goth on the hood of this car,
Yeah.
drinking wine, and there's a bucket of fried chicken
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
next to her, which I actually thought was kind of funny. And I would be very curious to know like where they got that, and like like if that it was just like a last minute thing, or if that was written in the script.
The best use of fried chicken in a weird ass what's the William Friedkin movie I'm thinking of?
Killer Joe,
Killer Joe.
which is
That's what I
also
thought
was a,
of.
like an
Um
NC-17 or unrated movie when it came out because of that final sequence.
I mean, probably the most explicit fried chicken scene I've ever seen in that movie, but unless you've been to a KFC at 4 in the morning in
That's just
Toronto.
explicit in general.
Um, yeah, yeah. I don't know. Like, again, I get that there's an audience for this. Didn't work for me at all. Um, I'm gonna give the movie. I was pretty low on it. I'm gonna give it a 1.5 out of 5. So there was, like, again, a couple interesting ideas there for me, but I was so turned off by some of the imagery that I can't recommend it. But I feel like, you know, it's a little subjective, right? Like, it's
Yeah,
if it's gonna be your cup of tea, it's gonna be your cup of tea. It was not mine.
yeah. I think it.
Oh,
I think
one
it's.
thing I wanted before you
Yeah.
before you go, one thing I wanted to point out that I thought was weird. Um, when they're watching their own execution, the family is also in
Oh,
front of
there.
him
Yes. Yeah.
watching it. And then I go, do they know it's a clone being killed? Do they care? Because he's sitting literally right behind him. He's not like they would see that. Hey, that's him being executed over there. Is this his twin behind us? Like, who? Like, to me, that was like one of those things of I couldn't understand the concept of being like, wouldn't the family, like, are you getting satisfaction from that you're seeing your father's killer be executed? But if you know it's a clone, would that give you, like, who cares at that point? Usually it's the government doing it to satisfy the families or things like that. That's why they have this no tolerance policy, but they do this secret thing to make money on the side, which is an interesting concept, like you said. But then I go, the fuck, okay, even them watching themselves is an interesting concept, but I just couldn't, I couldn't get behind going, he's literally sitting in the same room as them. Like, he's not off to
Yeah.
the side hiding somewhere. I'm like, wouldn't they fucking,
I mean,
I
they
don't
might
know.
as well
Anyways,
high
I wanted to
five
point
each
that out.
other. Like that's how
Yeah,
close
I'm
they
just
are.
like,
It's like, we did it.
I don't know. I'm thinking if someone killed my significant other, and then they're like, oh well, we're gonna kill him, but it's his clone. And I'm like, I don't know if I know. I don't. So, like, but then if they don't tell you that, then maybe don't put the homie in the same room as I don't know. Anyways, that was my little
No,
nitpick.
that's
My
a
little
good
one
question
thing.
though, because I was thinking that when like you have that they're all kind of sitting there, and it's like, so
And these aren't
what's the
spoilers
point of
because that's the
this?
premise of the movie.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah,
Like, what's the point in general, or what's the
well, what's the
like,
point? What's
obviously
the point
them
of going through
making
the motions with the exception of profiting off of it? Like, does the
yeah.
family make any of that? Do they get any of that money, or is it just all going to
Like, do they
the
know that
corrupt
they're clones, or do
officials?
they think
Yeah,
I assume the families think it's the real person getting killed, or else why do this in general, right?
but the guy's
Like, other
sitting right behind them. Like
That's what I mean. That's
yeah,
what was my nitpick of going, like, if they even if he entered the room after them, they'd probably look being like, who's homeboy behind me, watching
it's
my,
like your twin
like,
brother.
this execution. And then you're like, yeah, like, that's the kind of shit. And I think it only happens at the first one.
Yeah,
But anyways, I don't know. It was that one, like, either, nitpicky or plot hole kind of thing of going, like, I don't get that. And anyways, I just wanted to throw that out there before we wrapped up. So anyways, 1.5 out of 5.
yeah. I'm gonna give it 3 out of 5. I think it's fine. Like I think it's one of those movies where it's like I get what it's doing. I think the first act works quite well in terms of just setting up a mood and a tone. Ultimately, it's a midnight movie. I think what I'm not the biggest fan of overall is kind of that psychedelic imagery. I think like I
Yeah.
get the point of it, but at the same time, like he already did a lot of that with Possessor, and it kind of feels almost like you could put scenes from both of those movies side by side, and you wouldn't be able to tell. I mean, maybe with the exception of actors being in the frame, um, but still distorted. Um, what movie it's from, and it kind of feels like again, like maybe he's making a point about that as well, where like the technology is maybe in the same world, or that's I mean David Cronenberg does the same thing. Like a lot of his technology, one of the things I loved about Crimes of the Future is that the technology in that was very similar to the technology in Existence, where it had kind of almost like this organic fleshy kind of um living breathing, it was almost like an organism, and when you're watching those scenes you kind of feel like when they're touching it it's almost like a visceral experience in itself. And so with Infinity Pool, I think the best stuff is the concept itself, the just the filmmaking overall and the location. I do think there is something weirdly unsettling about shooting in such a scenic place, but then also just underneath the surface, there's dread, and also kind of being sucked into it and kind of liking it, I think is saying something, but you know maybe it could have been a little bit more developed.
So reach around, grab a popcorn
Jesus.
and a soda, and enjoy Infinity Pool in
First 20
theaters
minutes you'll
this
know if it's
Friday.
for you.
Yeah, you will. January 27th, it'll be out in cinemas across the US and Canada. Eric, thank you for joining. Uh, Go check out our other Sundance reviews. We have a couple up right now for Eileen, Fair Play, Magazine Dreams, all very dark movies, much like Infinity Pool. I feel like that's been the theme of Sundance so far. Some disturbing, whatever in all of those movies. So go check those out. We're covering a bunch of films from the Sundance Film Festival. We'll have reviews for the next week or so, probably a couple per day. So keep checking back to Untitled Movie Reviews for all of those. We do have a new podcast up on Untitled Movie Podcast where we talk about the Oscar nominations as well as the Critics' Choice winners. That's episode 134 over there. And we also have a new show called The Cast of Us, which is an untitled HBO The Last of Us podcast. It's an after show. So Eric and I, every Sunday night, 10 p.m. Eastern, right after the newest episode of HBO's The Last of Us airs, we'll have a brand new episode for you, breaking down that entire episode scene by scene, all the Easter eggs, all the little character moments, all the things you might have missed, all the connections between the game and the show and what's different. I think it's my favorite thing we've done in a long time. And I think we do good shit, but like that show specifically, I'm very proud of, because it's obviously something I'm very passionate about, and I'm so happy to share that with Eric, who's experiencing it for the first time. but then also from a creative standpoint, like we're taking so many notes and we're going really in depth on it, and it's liberating to talk about something in full spoilers and things like that. So please go check that out. Drop a rating if you'd be so kind on your podcast service of choice. Thumbs up that YouTube video. Send it to your friends. Thank you to everyone who's shared any of our stuff lately. We're always very grateful, so we appreciate it. One-stop shop for everything. Head over to Letterboxd. You should be on Letterboxd if you're not a sponsor. It's Untitled_movies over on Letterboxd. As always, my name is Matt Rohrbeck. You can find more of my work around the internet, but mostly on untitledmoviepodcast.com. And you can follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And I'm Eric March, and you can find more of my video reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on all the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
Dip that tip into Thanos' infinity pool.
Bye, everyone.